It was a quiet Christmas Eve in a small coastal village. Few houses had lights on. Most cottages were dark, huddled under the expanse of a bruised purple sky. Beyond the dunes, the ocean had stilled into the long evening, its waves falling away like a steady, slow breath. In a stone cottage that faced the sea, a middle-aged woman sat by a narrow window watching the horizon. She kept the room dim, letting only the firelight play across the wooden floorboards. Outside, a simple pine wreath hung on the door, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifted in with the sea breeze. She traced patterns on the cool wood of the window frame, listening to the rhythm of the waves as they came and went. The last rays of the sun touched the tips of the dunes, and inside the small cottage the air felt like a hush. By the hearth, her shawl felt just a bit heavier around her shoulders, as if it too understood the weight of the season. She had spent Christmas at this cottage each year, even before her husband passed away last winter. They had loved this quiet corner of the world, where the old church bells of the next village echoed over the water. Without him, the holiday had become even quieter and more contemplative. Tonight, she sat alone by the hearth, the wood fire crackling and casting flickering light on the old stone walls. Outside, the waves murmured in the distance, and the room felt both empty and familiar at the same time. She looked down at a half-finished cup of tea in her hands and gently exhaled. The cottage was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the distant murmur of waves, and she almost felt the stillness around her breathing with her. Though sadness lingered in her chest, she had grown used to this kind of solitude, punctuated only by the creaks and whispers of the old house. In that moment, a small sound drew her attention. On the doorstep, in the deepening twilight, she saw movement. At first it seemed like a trick of shadow and light, a fluttering shape at the edge of her vision. She blinked twice and then realized what it was. A little bird perched on the wooden threshold of her front door. The bird was small and brown, feathers fluffed against the chill of the evening air. It tilted its head curiously as it took in the sight of her. For an instant, neither of them moved, and the two quiet figures paused on either side of the doorway. She rose from her chair slowly, heart beating a little faster at the unexpected sight. The faint scent of tea and pine lingered as she stepped toward the door. Outside, the air was cool on her face, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. The little bird watched her quietly, without fear, as she inched closer. Gingerly, she extended her hand with a few crumbs of bread from a nearby plate. The sparrow hopped forward, as if in gratitude, then pecked at the crumbs near her boots. It did not venture further inside. Instead, it hopped to a stone step and looked back at her expectantly. The winter chill painted her cheeks rosy, and she felt a spark of warmth at this simple interaction. For a long moment, she stood inside while the sparrow ate calmly outside. The room was bright with firelight, and outside the dunes began to shimmer under an early frost. For a long moment, she stood just inside while the sparrow ate quietly outside. She could feel her breath matching the bird's gentle little breaths. Outside, the waves continued their steady rhythm, and the sky deepened into a clear night blue. She offered another crumb, smiling as an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. It was a simple thing, really. a woman and a bird meeting on a quiet Christmas Eve. Yet in it, she felt the first real peace she had felt in months. "It's all right," she murmured, though the only answer was the sparrow's soft chirp. Back inside the cottage, a little smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Outside, even as flakes of snow began to fall in a lazy dance, the bird seemed perfectly content at her doorstep. She finally closed the door gently, leaving the bird in the hush of the evening. Back at the hearth, she poured herself another cup of tea and wrapped her hands around the warm mug. The room smelled faintly of pine and the slight smoke from the fire. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted by and the world seemed muted and calm. Sitting there, she quietly realized that the house did not feel so empty as it had just minutes before. In its silence, it now felt alive with promise. The next morning, the world outside seemed different. Thin sheets of ice had formed on the tuned grass, turning the beach into a quiet garden of frost-covered patterns. She awoke to find golden sunlight streaming through the curtains, and the sparrow was perched on the windowsill, chirping a lively greeting. A warm smile came to her face before she was fully awake. She poured a fresh cup of tea and stepped outside with a plate of oats and seeds she had mixed for the bird. The sparrow hopped down to the sand and pecked gratefully, and she sat on the cottage steps watching it. Together they ate the small breakfast in the crisp air. Above them, a few gulls began to circle against the pale morning sky, and their distant cries added a hopeful note. Bands of pink and gold began to bleed across the horizon, and the ocean beyond the dunes caught the light in a slow gleam. For a while she simply watched the sun rise, the birds' cheerful song filling the quiet morning. She spoke softly to the bird, sharing simple thoughts about her day and life. The breeze seemed to warm itself a bit, almost like an unseen companion leaning in to listen. She told the sparrow how she had opened a book the night before and found she could not sleep, about the dreams of rolling tides and distant lighthouses that drifted through her mind. The bird listened, tilting its head as if it understood. Though only one of them was speaking aloud, each felt understood in the peaceful silence they shared. As the morning grew brighter, she decided to take a short walk along the dunes. The sand path crunched lightly under her boots, and the cold air filled her lungs. The bird flitted ahead of her, occasionally landing on a driftwood log or a gusty clump of grass as if to show her the way. She paused atop a rise to look out at the endless ocean. The wide expanse of gray-blue water seemed to calm her restless thoughts. Sunlight danced on the waves, and in that vast stillness, her worries felt distant and small. Leaning on an old wooden fence, she watched the sparrow hop from one tuft of dune grass to another. She thought of how strange and wonderful it was that this tiny creature could touch her heart so deeply. The patterns of foam on the shore reminded her of the patterns of her own thoughts. Some days smooth and clear, other days tangled, yet always moving forward. Each detail, the distant cry of a gull, the warmth of sunlight on her face, felt like a reminder that the world outside still held beauty. In that moment, she felt the last edge of sorrow slip away, leaving only gratitude. Eventually, she turned and began the walk back to the cottage. The sparrow followed her part of the way, then alighted on a gatepost as if waving farewell. Inside the cottage, the kettle whistled softly on the stove, and the room was warm and cozy again. She made herself another mug of tea and settled near the window with a thick blanket around her shoulders. The sparrow rapped gently at the window and then hopped onto the sill, watching her with bright eyes. It felt like a faithful little friend dropping by, and she felt grateful for the company. By midday, the sky had turned a pale winter blue. A few small clouds drifted overhead. The woman prepared a simple lunch of soup and bread, setting a bowl aside for the bird on the porch. When she later stepped back into the kitchen, the sparrow had fluttered inside as if to join her, perching on the chair by the table. Its presence was casual, as though it had been there often. She watched its tiny feet tap the wood and found herself quietly humming an old sea shanty she remembered. The tune felt comforting in the quiet kitchen. Later that afternoon, the first flakes of a winter storm began to fall softly on the dunes. Inside, she had already piled wood in the hearth and lit the lamps. The fire crackled, and the cottage glowed golden. She sat in her favorite chair by the window while the sparrow found a warm spot on the sill. Through the glass, she watched the snow swirl in the fading light outside. The bird fluffed its feathers but stayed calm in the glow of the firelight. In that peaceful moment, she felt profound gratitude. It was just a bird on a snowy night, and yet it held a place in her heart. She thought of the many nights she had spent alone in this old house, and how different this one felt. There was no heavy ache in her chest anymore. Instead, the storm raged outside while peace remained inside. She leaned her head back and watched the flames dance. An old melody her husband used to whistle drifted through her mind as if the house itself were humming it. A small smile tugged at her lips. Night deepened, and soon the snow fell thick and silent. She set a steaming cup of tea on the table and opened the old book she had been reading. It was a story about travelers and distant seas, and as she read a passage about a lighthouse keeper, she felt the words were meant just for her. Outside, the sparrow closed its eyes at last. Occasionally, a glow from the lamp at the door would light its feathers as it dozed. In the quiet hush of pages turning and snow falling, sleep finally found its way to her. When she woke the next morning, a stillness greeted her. The storm had passed and a fresh layer of snow covered the dunes. She stepped outside and was struck by how bright everything seemed. Footprints led away from the door toward the dunes. The sparrow had been out early. Curious, she followed them to see where they might lead. Under a dune crest, she found the little bird, perched on a weathered driftwood log, looking out to sea. It chirped softly when it saw her approach, as if greeting an old friend. She crouched beside it, the snow crunching under her knees, and together they watched the sun rise. Bands of gold and rose stretched across the horizon, and the water lay mirror still. The sparrow seemed to sing a happy tune, as if celebrating the sunrise for her. In that moment, she felt the last edge of sorrow slip away, leaving only gratitude. Weeks passed, Winter sunlight returned a little earlier each day, and the hold of the cold on the air felt a bit softer. Each morning, the sparrow continued to appear at the doorstep, and in the afternoons it flitted around the garden by the house, searching for scraps or seeds. Sometimes she would find it perched on the stone wall, exactly where she had set a saucer of water. Each small surprise made her smile. The world had grown quiet again, but it no longer felt lonely. Even as the days remained cold, she had come to enjoy these routines. The ocean was ever present, the swell of the tides, the distant cry of gulls, the whisper of the winter wind through the dry grasses on the dunes. She often sat outside in a wooden chair at sunset, wrapped in her heavy shawl, and fed the sparrow crusts of bread until the light faded. Sometimes she softly named the colors of the sky as if teaching the bird. Other times she simply closed her eyes and listened to the slow crash of waves on the shore, glad for the company of life around her. When New Year's Eve arrived, she felt a quiet sense of hope. She placed a single candle in the window like an old tradition, and the light danced on the frosted glass. The sparrow did not visit at midnight, but somehow she felt it was there in spirit. The village around her slept under a blanket of snow and silence, except for the distant tolling of church bells. Standing on the doorstep, wrapped in wool, she wished her husband a gentle good night in her mind, and felt ready to face the new year. On the day after New Year's, she found a piece of driftwood on the shore and placed it on the mantel. It was knobbly and worn from the sea, but to her it symbolized a quiet promise that even things tossed by storms could endure. Each time she glanced at that driftwood, she smiled. The sparrow remained her steady visitor each day, and she no longer felt the emptiness she once did at her doorstep. Though the dunes shifted and the seasons turned, she understood that kindness and connection could hold fast. As winter continued, sunlight lingered longer in the afternoons. The cottage, once still and shadowed, now filled with warm light by midday. She spent slow afternoons knitting by the fire, or mending fishing nets for the few people who lived nearby. The sparrow sometimes found her indoors, fluttering down to peck at stray bits of yarn or a crumb on the floor. It was a quietly joyful companion, and sometimes she caught herself laughing quietly at its antics. These were simple things, but they felt enough. She noticed one morning that the first snowdrop had poked through the snow at the edge of her garden. Life around her had quietly found its way back. The sparrow was there as always, scratching for seeds among the early growth. The dunes held their winter shapes still, but the promise of spring was on the horizon. All through this gentle turning of the year, she felt at peace. All through the seasons ahead, whenever the wind grew cold and the nights turned long again, she remembered that first Christmas morning when the little bird appeared at her doorstep. In those quiet memories, she found comfort. And so life returned slowly, quietly beneath the dunes, in the kind company of an unexpected friend.